Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very excited to be the host for our teen panel today. We are going to be talking about American Jewry, and we always hear about different studies coming out, but they never really focus specifically on American Jewish teens. This is the future generation, and it is important that we listen to their voices when it comes to anti-Semitism, Israel, and Zionism. We are fortunate to be joined here today with teens from all across the country, proud Club Z teens. We have Natalie, who's a junior, calling in from Club Z headquarters in Silicon Valley. We have Daniel, a senior, calling in from New York. We have Jennifer, a senior from Los Angeles, and Evan, a senior from Charlotte. Welcome all, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us on another Zoom call. Today, I want to learn a little bit about what it's like to be a Jewish student in high school today. Natalie, I know you've been with Club Z for 3 years, so could you tell us a little bit about why you joined Club Z and why you still continue to be so involved today?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Philip. I'm really excited to be here. So I joined Club Z definitely because of my family. My parents are from the former Soviet Union, so growing up, I was just constantly hearing stories of the anti-Semitism that they faced and that they had to live through. And because of their childhood, they knew that, the freedoms that they came to America for shouldn't be taken for granted. And they wanted me to be able to identify the anti-Semitism that they faced in their home country here. So that's why I joined Club Z originally. And I stay just honestly because it's really fun. I have a lot of great friends and I've made a lot of connections. And it's just a great place to talk about anything political, anything, really just nothing is off limits at Club Z. And that's why I love it so much.
So growing up, I would hear about the terrorist attacks that were happening in Israel. And when I was 5 years old, my aunt's house in northern Israel was destroyed by a Hezbollah rocket. And at the time, she was in Tiberias at a hotel, and she saw her own room be destroyed by the rocket on TV, which is scary. So from that day, I began to learn more and more about the conflict, and I just became more and more interested over the years. So when I was in my freshman year of high school, I realized I needed a space where I can talk to my friends and my peers about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And yeah, so when my mom found Club Z on Facebook, I jumped at the opportunity right away. I told all my friends to join too, and it just went from there.
Wow, well, thank you both for sharing those personal stories about your family that have shaped your Jewish identity and who you are today. I want to talk a little bit more about identity and specifically your Jewish identity. I remember from my time in Club Z, a foundational lesson that we learned was that Jews are indigenous to Israel and the importance of peoplehood to one's Jewish identity. Jennifer, I know you went to a Jewish day school for 8 years. Could you tell us a little bit about your Jewish education there? What did you learn about your Jewish identity when it comes to Jews being from Judea and Jewish peoplehood?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having all of us here today, Philip. But what I want to say is that, funny enough, in my 8 years of Jewish education, the entire time we learned of Israel in terms of our religious identity. Like, sure, we learned lots about Judaism in terms of, prayers and Israeli songs, but the idea of Israel itself was only portrayed in a lens that, we had a religious connection. And coming to Club Z really blew my mind when I learned the idea that Jews are indigenous, because it made me realize that being Jewish, it's not just about religion. And if we're an ethnic tribe, a people, a family, then being Jewish is not a choice. We don't get to choose how much we participate. It's in our blood and it's part of our peoplehood. And so we're naturally tied to it. And I think that just creates a stronger feeling that we're tied to not only our people, but we're just like that. With this one phrase, Jews are from Judea, we understand we're just tied to our land.
And Jennifer, I totally agree. When I was a kid too, I thought that Judaism was just a religious thing. But what I think is interesting that I found this out recently is for Russian Jews in the Soviet Union, being Jewish was not a matter of religion. It was more nationality or ethnicity even. It was pretty much written in every government document, from your birth certificate to school rosters to passports, all that stuff. And everyone knew, like your teachers, your boss, your neighbors, they all knew that you weren't like them, even if you didn't do anything remotely Jewish. And so in the eyes of society, you were not a Russian, you were a foreigner, essentially. And my grandparents, my mother's parents, wanted to protect her from all this. So They hid her identity from her. She didn't even know that she was Jewish until she was 16, which is crazy to think about because that's not much younger than I am right now.
Yeah, and I think that the trends that Evan is kind of describing is why it's so easy for me to say that Jews are from Judea. You know, I may not be from Israel, my parents may not be from there, but that's where my people come from. So I just don't think that you can separate being a Jew and the land of Israel.
Okay, Natalie, I hear you all, but let me push back a little bit because you just said that you can't separate being a Jew from the land of Israel. We know plenty of people today who say, they are Jewish, proud Jews, but Zionism has nothing to do with their Jewish identity. If I understand what you're saying that Zionism is central to your Jewish identity. So how can you explain those two opposites?
I mean, if I may interject, I just want to say I think American Jews have done a terrible job defining Zionism. Because when you think of Zionism simply as an ism, like, say, nationalism, capitalism, or socialism, then you end up thinking about Zionism as if it's some political movement as well, which simply isn't true. I mean, the word Zion, Sion, means Jerusalem, and it comes from the Torah. And this word is as old as the Jewish people themselves. So when you think about it, I think American Jews get so stuck on this idea of an ism as if Zionism were simply some sort of political ideology, when in reality, it's fundamental to our belief as Jewish people, but more importantly, fundamental to our indigeneity and our peoplehood as we, trace ourselves back to the areas around Jerusalem. So American Jews, I think, just miss this idea, and they think so much about the ism and they forget what is the root of the word Zion, Sion.
So how do we address that hot topic of anti-Zionism versus anti-Semitism? People say that those two are completely unrelated, that anti-Zionism is just criticism of Israeli government or Israel's policies.
Criticizing the Israeli government it's a different thing from anti-Zionism. They're two separate things. Anyone can criticize the Israeli government. The Israelis have had literally 4 elections in the past year. They criticize their own government all the time. Come on. Anti-Zionism, it's more than that. You're denying Jews the right to have sovereignty in their indigenous homeland. So, yeah, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic because if you're denying Jews and only Jews the right to sovereignty in their own homeland, then that makes you an anti-Semite.
I just want to add that recently Zionism has become masked as this progressive political position that in theory is supposed to help protect minority rights. Unfortunately, anti-Zionism is using the exact same accusations that have historically been exclusively applied to the Jews. And these are not some wishy-washy accusations. It's the real deal. These accusations lead to the persecution of the Jewish people time and time again. Take the Holocaust, for example. And now Israel has become the Jew among the nations in the world.
Yeah, so I think that the accusations, just to clarify, that Evan is talking about are things like blood libel, like demonization, claims that have historically been applied uniquely to the Jews and that are now being applied uniquely to the only Jewish state, the state of Israel. And I think it's not hard for anyone who's honest to say that accusing the prime minister of Israel of being a devil bent on world domination is anti-Semitic, or depicting American officials as being controlled by some Israeli lobby. It's all anti-Semitic, and it all comes back to an anti-Semitic trope.
Okay, but we have proud Jews today who say they are anti-Zionist. So what are you trying to say here? Are you saying that they are anti-Semitic?
So I think more often than not, Jews are just misguided in the sense, especially American Jews. And if you see being Jewish as simply about social justice and eating bagels, then you're going to miss the fact that Israel is integral to who we are. And especially if, you get fed information from other places, especially places filled with hatred, and then you end up seeing Israel as not only just simply one of the many places to live, but also you see it in a negative light, with words like the occupation. But to be honest, I just think that they don't know the full history.
Right, so like I said earlier, if you're an anti-Zionist, that inherently makes you an anti-Semite since you're denying Jews the right to sovereignty in their indigenous land. So, yeah, if you're an anti-Zionist, whether you're a Jew or not, you're anti-Semitic whether or not you say explicitly that you hate Jews. And as for Jews being anti-Semites, yes, of course you can be anti-Semitic if you're a Jew. It's called playing a role in the oppression of your own people.
I know at Club Z, another foundational lesson is critical thinking skills, specifically to recognize, identify, and combat biases. So I want to learn a little bit more about that. Could you please tell me about how Club Z prepares you to recognize those biases?
Of course. So for me, Club Z has given me and my peers the space to think critically and to basically question everything. In fact, Olga Washington, our regional director here in Charlotte, consistently tells us pretty much every session to go home and fact check what she tells us so that we won't take her word as absolute truth. She wants to make sure that we're up to date on all of our information. So yes, we do learn facts about Israel's history and anti-Semitism and things like that. But I think the most important thing that we learn are how to identify narratives and specifically the agendas behind them.
Now, you're talking about agendas. People come to me all the time and they say, Philip, Club Z has an agenda. So I want to ask you all directly here, point blank question. Does Club Z have an agenda?
Of course it has an agenda. No, I mean, everybody and everything has an agenda. But the question is, what is the agenda based on? And is the agenda made clear? And in Club Z, the agenda is clearly expressed in everything we do. And Club Z's agenda, for example, is to create a new generation of teens who are strong and confident to stand up for Israel and to stand up for themselves. And the thing is, not all agendas are created equal. Some agendas are based on lies and hatred. And what Club Z teaches us so well is to be able to identify the biases in these different narratives that expose the lies and hatred. And I think that's one of the amazing things that you learn, because the question is, there's always bias and there's always a narrative, but can you identify it? And that comes with training.
I think every single person has an agenda. Every single organization has an agenda and a purpose. That's kind of the whole point. And I think that our generation is the first generation in history where in our schools we are taught not actual verified history, but we're taught narratives. And narratives have agendas. They have very clear goals to fulfill. And it's up to us to recognize the difference. And we're not taught to recognize the difference. So I think that that's one very important thing that Club Z contributes. Club Z teaches us how to recognize the difference between verified facts and narratives.
Oftentimes when you're on a college campus, you hear different types of language. So my question for you, Natalie, since you're in the midst of your Club Z education, if you hear someone using the words occupation, apartheid, what does that tell you about their agenda and their biases?
This kind of twisting of words that's going on is just a really brilliant play by the anti-Zionists in America, who are often progressives, to kind of distort the meaning of the word, to make it really easy to side with the anti-Zionists. You know, you hear someone's under occupation, there's an immediate place you go to, and it's, I don't want to support, colonialists who occupy indigenous peoples. So the way that these words are twisted makes it really hard for someone who doesn't understand the ins and outs of these narratives and these biases to identify them. And Club Z honestly has taught me to do that, to not take anything kind of at face value, to research what people are saying, to verify whether these claims are accurate. It's just something also that I don't think you really get on a high school campus. At least my high school hasn't really taught me how to think critically enough to be able to identify that kind of thing. But it's a really valuable skill to have, to be able to see when someone is using those kinds of that language against you.
Jennifer, can I throw this one to you?
Yes, of course, Philip. So when they say something along the lines of, Jews being an occupying power, what they essentially mean is that, Jews are not indigenous to Judea. What they're doing is, in essence, denying history. And all of the history of the Jewish people is that we're indigenous to Judea, and we've had history here for thousands of years. And by using language that paints the Jews as foreigners, as colonizers, it completely eradicates any claims that the Jews have to the land. And it makes it, like Natalie said, incredibly hard for you, for someone else to understand, the truth of the matter, which is that we are an indigenous people. And so every word is chosen so carefully in order to deny the Jewish people their claims to the land and their history and the truth of the matter. And so it's very important to recognize this language, because even one word can hold such a powerful meaning. And with one word itself, you can already see how people are switch their views to be against something simply because of words that are oftentimes either they're half-truths or they're outright lies.
Let's take the conversation to anti-Semitism. I know that anti-Semitism is extremely high now in high schools, and especially on social media. Studies have found that 1/3 of Jewish teens don't feel comfortable identifying as a Zionist in public. I'm wondering, have any of you personally experienced anti-Semitism? And perhaps even more importantly, even if you haven't experienced anti-Semitism, how do you feel about fighting back and standing up?
Great question, Philip. So I personally have experienced minimal anti-Semitism, but to answer your question, let me ask another question back at you. When an African-American man is beaten on the streets and other African-American people protest it, do you ask them, hey, why are you protesting this? What makes you, want to stand up for this? Did they experience that particular incident of racism? No. But the thing is, their feeling of kinship and their bonds within their people are so strong that they naturally want to support and they want to be able to stand with their people when one of their members of their people is under attack. And I think that's something we need to bring to the Jewish community because in essence, once you understand that we as Jews are one people, one tribe, one family, then naturally we too are going to feel a need and a desire to stand up when one of our peoples is under attack. And for me, Jews are family. So yes, if someone's going to punch my brother, I'm going to go after them. Same thing with anti-Semitism.
It's obvious you all know a lot. You guys think about these topics and discuss these topics a lot. But Clubsy is not just a think tank. I want to talk a little bit about action. I know many of your friends, either at school or extracurriculars, they're scared. We just heard from the activist panel. Adela mentioned how she could have never imagined that she was going to be the headline on the front page Jewish activist. So what will you guys be taking from these activism stories?
Yeah, so Adela's story definitely had a huge impact on me. First of all, because it's just heartbreaking to know that she tried to work within the system. She tried to do right by her university, but the system essentially worked against her. The university awarded Students for Justice in Palestine. It's crazy to think that that's the environment that I will be entering really soon. But it's also just a really inspiring story to know that she actually did take action and helped Jews on every college campus. She's just really an example and a role model for me, and I hope that in the future I have her strength and her courage to call out Jew haters and to hold people accountable like Adela did.
Natalie, I'm totally with you. Adela's story was really inspiring for me as well. But I think we also have to consider that activism doesn't come in just one form. It doesn't necessarily have to be standing with an Israeli flag on a street corner. Personally, I like talking to people, and having one-on-one conversations allows me to directly educate my friends and even change some minds. A great example is a friend that I've been very close with for about 4 years sent something that was very anti-Zionist to my group chat, and I called him out, and we talked about it, and I showed him a bunch of resources on educating himself about Israel's history and anti-Semitism and such. And because we were two level-headed individuals, we can have a normal conversation, and he saw what he was doing was anti-Semitic. So, and as cheesy as it sounds, I wouldn't really be able to do any of that without a Clubsy education.
Yeah, so I'm already out there. I make videos about anti-Semitism and Zionism, and I break down the myths, lies, and manipulations said about my people. And when you think about it, how ridiculous is it that we even have to talk about coming out as a Zionist? Like, what other group of people has to go through that? And I just want to say that everything we've been talking about this panel today really boils down to one thing: stolen identities. And the beauty of breaking free is that we're reclaiming the word Zionism. We're taking the word back as our own, because it is. And the word Zionism is such an amazing thing. And it's such an amazing thing to reclaim it and to be proud of such a beautiful and central thing to being a Jew.
Well, one thing that I was reminded of after listening to these inspiring stories, especially Adela's, I found was very inspiring, was that in the long run, we really don't have anyone watching our backs. The Jews have to stand. Yes, we have a few allies here and there, but the Jews are alone in this world. We always have had to fight for ourselves, and we're always going to have to fight for ourselves.
Wow, this is awesome. I know we're just meeting virtually, but I really am inspired to go ahead and break free. Now, we're almost out of time. I just want to open it up. Is there anything else anybody would like to add?
Yeah, I mean, if I can just say, none of us are kidding ourselves here. We know that just one random American Jew sitting alone in her room is not going to single-handedly protect, a country, the state of Israel. But it's a lot more than that. We are defending ourselves and our peoples and our identity. So I just want to say I'm really grateful to be on a panel where I can express that and where I can defend myself. So thank you.
Adding on to what Natalie said, when we stand up against anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism, we're not trying to defend some country, thousands of miles away. Like, they can do that on their own. But in essence, every attack on Israel, every attack on Zionism is a direct attack on our people as a Jewish people. So every time we stand up, we're not standing up for a country, we're standing up for ourselves and for our entire nation and each and every one of us. So I think that's such a beautiful thing. And I just want to thank everyone for making this possible today and for having us on this panel.
Well, thank you so much to all of you here. It has really been an honor to host this panel. I'm proud of all the work you are doing, and I can't wait to see what you guys will be doing on college campuses. I know that the future is in good hands.